Oh, good morning. Miss Graham, who's the first witness today?
The first witness today is Constable James McDonough.
Good morning, Constable.
Good morning.
You're going to be asked questions by Miss Graham. Before we do that, would you say the words of the affirmation after me? I solemnly, sincerely and truly
I solemnly, sincerely and truly
declare and affirm
that
I will tell the truth,
I will tell the truth,
the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Miss Graham.
Thank you. Good morning. Are you James McDonough?
That's correct, yes.
And what age are you?
I'm 29.
And how many years service do you have?
I've got 7 full years service now.
And in 2015?
Roughly, it was about 6 months.
6 months since you'd left Tullyallen.
Yeah, I think, yeah, that would be correct, yeah, end of November.
Were you still a probationer?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. And who was your, we've heard about mentors or supervisors, who was your supervisor?
So my tutor constable, I think, is that what you're referring to, tutor
Yes,
constable?
sorry, I couldn't remember the name there.
No, that's fine. My tutor constable at the time was PC Brian Geddes.
Now, we've got all your contact details, so we don't need you to say that. Have you got a black folder in front of you?
I do, yes.
Yeah. Have you seen any of the other hearings so
Yes.
far? So you'll know that I want you to be as comfortable as you can be, and I want to make sure you've got everything that you might need during the course of this morning. So in that black folder should be hard copies of your PERC statement and your inquiry statement. Do you see that?
Yeah, I do, yes.
And you must feel free to refer to that at any time if you wish. So when I'm asking for paragraphs of your inquiry statement to go on the screen, they'll come up on the screen in front of you.
Yep.
But if there's anything around that paragraph you want to see, you can refer to your hard copies.
Okay.
Great. Can we look first of all at PERC 273, please?
Yep.
And you'll see that this is a PERC statement dated the 4th of June 2015, and it was taken at 12:20 by Gary Sinclair, investigator, in the presence of William Davidson, investigator. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct, yeah.
And do you recognise this? It was taken at the Scottish Police College on that date.
Yes, I remember it, yeah.
Great. And were you given a chance to look over it, or was it read over to you?
I think I remember it being read back to me.
And I know that there's a few things you'd like to comment on as we go through. I'll go through those. I have those points highlighted, and I'll go through those when we come to them, if you don't mind.
No, that's perfect.
But subject to those alterations, which we will come to today, you were doing your best to tell the truth to the PERC and as accurate as you could be.
Absolutely.
Thank you. And then can we look at SBPI 63, please? And this should be your inquiry statement. Now, it's headed up response to Rule 8 request, and as you'll have heard me say to other officers, you were sent a large number of questions by the inquiry team, and you and your lawyers prepared this statement yourselves and sent it into the inquiry team.
Yeah.
So although it's headed up response to Rule 8 request, I'm just going to call that your inquiry statement.
No problem.
Great. And can we look at the final page, please? Just where, thank you. And after paragraph 89, it says, I believe the facts stated in this witness statement are true. I understand that this statement may form part of the evidence before the inquiry and be published on the inquiry's website. And in light of that, although we don't see it on the screen, on your hard copy, you've got a signature there, your signature.
Yes.
And thank you, that's great. And my understanding is that that statement was dated the 1st of May 2022.
Yes, that probably is about right, actually.
Is
yeah.
that about right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that is.
Thank you. So are you happy that you've got your statements that you might want to refer to in front of you?
Yes, I am.
And then in addition, to your left, you'll see a spreadsheet which is a combined video and audio timeline. You may have seen me refer to this with other people. And you'll see on the left there's a column with timings on it. And then just left of centre, you'll see transcripts of airwaves messages.
Yep.
You can see one at the bottom of page 1 of the spreadsheet.
Yeah.
And to the right-hand side, you'll see description of visible events in video.
Yep.
And that's a sort of thumbnail of what can be seen in CCTV. And if you've seen other evidence, you might have seen us play footage, combined footage.
Yeah.
Right. So you're probably reasonably familiar with that. But if you've any questions as we go through this morning, you can ask.
No problem. Thanks.
Thank you. And we can dip into that spreadsheet. So when your lawyer, Miss McCall QC, spoke on your behalf on the 11th of May, which was the day of the opening statements, she said, and I'm paraphrasing, that you want the chair to get to the truth of what happened. And that's why you're here today. And does that remain the position?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Well, let's start by just saying, first of all, you weren't at the scene when in Hayfield Road when there was an airwaves transmission saying an officer had been injured. At that time, you were on your way to Hayfield Road with Daniel Gibson.
That's correct.
And can we look, please, at the evidence video timeline? And I'll just play a minute of this footage just to let you see it. Starting at 7:21, we're just going to play a minute of this. Just watch it and look at the CCTV if you don't mind.
Control acknowledge, officer injured.
What's the locate? We've just got blue lights stopped, chasing the Galaxy River approaches. Thank you! Get alive! Control Bravo, one officer's been punched in the back of the head, no obvious serious injuries, male secure on the ground. 30 seconds out, 4-1.
It's Maxwell. If you're alive, you didn't give me an update, please.
Thank you very much. And could we go back to 7:21:46, and we'll just keep that, or just slightly. You see in the footage there a police car at the front coming up Henry Road, and as it carries on, and maybe we could play a second or two, Miss Wildgoose. This car here,
30 seconds
thank you.
out, 4-1.
The car that then turned right into Hayfield Road. Do you recognise that?
Yes, I do, yes.
And is that the Vauxhall Astra estate car that you and Daniel Gibson were in?
That's correct.
And we've heard that that might have been called the diary car.
Yes.
You recognise that?
Yeah.
And who was driving?
PC Daniel Gibson was driving that.
Were you in the front passenger seat?
That's correct.
Thank you. And could we maybe have a look now at your inquiry statement, please? And we'll look at paragraph 1 first of all. And here you describe that you were working the day shift that started at 7 in the morning, and at 10 past you were in the sergeant's room. Who was the sergeant?
That morning it was PS Scott Maxwell.
Thank you. And you heard a call on your airwave radio about a large male walking down Temple Hall Avenue in possession of a knife. And Scott Maxwell instructed all units to attend the call, and that included yourself and PC Gibson.
That's correct.
And were you on what's known as a response team number 4?
That's correct, yes.
And so did you make arrangements then to go and attend in relation to that knife incident?
Yes, I did, yeah.
Thank you. And I think you say all available units would attend a call of this nature due to the potential danger it presented. What do you mean by that?
the fact that there's a knife being mentioned, it's a lethal weapon. The more units you can have going there, the better. Just simply for if there was anyone to get injured, there's more officers there to try and get a hold of the situation.
And so that was the norm for a knife call in 2015?
Yes, if the units are available, certainly, yeah.
And can I ask you a little about previous knife incidents that you had attended? I appreciate you've told us you'd only been a probationer for 6 months at that stage. As part of the work you were doing, had you attended knife incidents?
Yes, I would have attended knife incidents. I'm struggling at that time to think of a specific incident that I've attended. It's one of those ones, if I knew if I was going to get asked that question, I would probably take a note of them. But I would say that they are relatively common to some degree throughout your working set of shifts.
What do you mean by common?
Well, I would put different types of knife incidents in the sort of same bracket as a knife incident. So, for example, a mental health call, someone in possession of a knife, harming themselves, cut their wrists or whatever. I would probably put that in the bracket as a knife incident. A robbery, for example, someone in possession of a knife to gain property from another person, or I would say that's a knife incident. Or just a general disturbance, a fight with people in possession of weapons or knives or sharp implements. So I would probably place all of them in that sort of same category.
How often would you be called out to one of those incidents?
Putting an exact figure is difficult. However, so in a set of shifts, there's six shifts in a set. I'd probably say maybe 4 or 5 in that set of shifts that you would maybe attend involving a knife.
Is a set a week for you?
Yeah,
Is that what you
essentially,
mean?
yeah.
So that's like a week, you'll do 6 shifts?
Yeah,
And you would maybe attend knife incidents for 4 out of the 6 of them?
yeah.
And we've heard that one of the other probationers, a PC Good, was attending with her tutor constable, Smith. And were you there? Were you not needing a tutor constable at that stage?
No, so you're the first 3 months of your probationary period is when you are with your tutor constable. So I was kind of out with that period, so I was working with other members on the shift.
Right. And just doing the normal work that they would do?
Yeah.
Of any of the incidents that you'd attended prior to the 3rd of May 2015, had any involved a black man with a knife?
No, I don't believe so, no.
Had any involved the person being under the influence of drink or drugs?
Again, it's difficult to think of exact scenarios or incidents, but yes, I would say that there would have been probably a fair amount, to be fair.
What's a fair amount? Could you help us?
Again, I would probably, it's difficult to put an exact figure on it, but maybe again 3 or 4 times in maybe even more actually, in a set of shifts.
Right. And you mentioned mental health calls where maybe someone's self-harming. How often would that happen?
I would say they're more common now, but they were still relatively common back in 2015 as well. Again, putting an exact figure on it is very difficult, but I'd maybe say once a shift.
Once a shift?
Yeah.
Right. And so would that be once a shift, some would have knives or sharp implements, but some wouldn't?
Yeah.
In the 6 months you'd been a probationer, attending these types of calls, how many had involved you using your CS spray?
I've never used my CS spray, and I still haven't to date.
Right. How many had involved you using your baton?
Again, I've never used my baton, and still to this day I've not used it.
How many had involved restraint?
Restraint, would you class putting handcuffs on someone as restraint, or hands-on? Because certainly I've used my fast straps before, prior to this incident. So yeah, again, putting a figure on it is difficult, but I've definitely used some form of restraint to deal with any
We've
incident.
heard that there's different levels of restraint.
Yeah.
And it can even be just holding someone by the wrist.
Yeah,
Or it could be a much more vigorous restraint.
yeah.
You've said you used leg straps or fast straps. Could you give us some more information about the time you'd used fast straps?
Yeah, it didn't involve a knife, however.
Right.
I still used them. So it was, I can't remember the exact date and time, but essentially we were called to a disturbance within a flat somewhere in Fife. As always, it's always a top floor flat that you're going to. And the nature of the call was like a domestic type call. I can't remember if it was domestic violence or verbal abuse. I can't quite remember. There was a couple of us, a couple of units attended, maybe 3. So you're looking at maybe 4, 5, 6 officers attending. And when we arrived, there was a male on the outside of the front door to the flat on the landing, banging on the door trying to get in, shouting verbal abuse. So we took him aside. Other officers established or tried to establish what the criminal intent was, or what crimes had been committed. We gained enough evidence to bring him into custody. So handcuffs were applied on the gentleman to the rear, and it was at that point when he realised he was getting arrested. He started kicking off. He started trying to bite officers, try to spit on officers, and using his legs to kick. And at that point, the most reasonable thing to do was to place him on the ground, get the leg restraints on him, so that one, officers were safe, he was safe, and we were able to safely take him down the flights of stairs to the van without him obviously kicking out and people falling down the stairs and that sort of stuff. So that's one incident that I remember using him prior to May 2015.
So that was on the top landing of a block of flats?
Yeah, it was about three floors up, I think I remember it being.
We've looked previously at a standard operating procedure, a SOP, that says that if you're putting leg restraints on, the person should be prone.
Yeah.
And was that the method that was adopted when you used
Yes,
them?
it was, yes.
So the person was prone, the leg restraints went on, and then he was escorted down to the van.
Yeah.
And were the handcuffs on first?
Yes, they were, yeah.
You've told us quite a lot about some of the cases calls you'd attended prior to May 2015. For the ones that you didn't use your spray or your baton or restraint, how did you manage to avoid using those pieces of equipment or those techniques?
Your best tool is your voice, communication skills. You generally find that there's no time scale on how long it should take to be able to communicate with someone, but even if someone is at least giving you some sort of response, you can generally keep going down the route of communication, and eventually they'll come down to your level and understanding and become compliant, essentially, yeah. So
you're saying no time scale?
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Just be patient with people. Just trying to, even if you're just getting abuse, to me it's still something. So just keep persevering with them, and eventually you may be able to get them to come into custody without the use of having leg restraints and batons, CSPs, that sort of stuff.
What if you're not getting abuse? What if there's no response? What if they don't say anything to you? Would you still be patient and attempt to communicate?
Yes, it depends what the threat is at the time, I suppose. What the circumstances are, the nature of the call. Just kind of all the circumstances really kind of need to be weighed up in that situation.
What if you're attending a knife call, but you don't see a knife and you don't get a reaction from the person? They just basically ignore you. Would you still attempt to communicate with them?
Still, depends what the threat posed in front of you is in that moment in time. Yes, you could do, because you can maintain your distance. However, the fact that there's no knife visible, for me, that's a bigger threat. The threat goes up at that point. It's one of those ones, in the moment, you might revert to using some form of restraint, or if it's still relatively safe to do so, you can still communicate. You've still got a couple of options there.
Right. Thank you. Can I ask you about your journey to Hayfield Road? As you were leaving Kirkcaldy Police Office, I think you were aware that PC Smith and PC Good were leaving at round about the same time.
Yeah, I was aware of officers leaving. I can't remember if I said if it was specifically them, but
paragraph 3 of your inquiry statement. Well, that was the next one I was going to come on to. But I think we may have heard that they were leaving at roughly the same time as you and Constable Gibson.
Yeah, I've got no reason to dispute that.
Yeah. And then paragraph 3, you talk here about the equipment that you were taking with you.
Yeah.
So you had your full PPE, baton, spray, leg restraints, and you say you also had slash-proof gloves.
Yeah.
And you say personal issue given to me by my tutor constable. Tell us about that.
I just remember one day that my tutor constable just gave me these slash-proof gloves and just said they're quite handy to have. I don't know where he got them from, but basically how it was explained to me is if you come into any contact of any sharp implement, there may be an occasion, I don't know, that you might have to take control of a blade, but not from the handle, so taking control or taking possession of the blade on the bladed side. So these slash-proof gloves are, the material, it's like, I'd probably describe it as being like a wire mesh type material, and it's got like, I think I remember them having some sort of like rubber beads on the palms, and I think that was essentially meant to be sort of the material would prevent any slashes and injuries to your hands if you came into contact with a sharp implement, like scissors or knives.
So another piece of protective equipment for you.
Yeah.
But you say that was personal issue. Was that not standard issue?
No, it wasn't, no. Like I say, I'm not too sure where he got them from, but he gave them to me as just looking out for me, I suppose.
And was that something that gave you an added layer of confidence as you approached a potential knife incident?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And you've said that you released the strap on my baton holder for quicker and easier access if required. Yeah. Tell us about what you were thinking at that time.
So I think at this point I had already heard the emergency button being activated, and with the mention of a knife and an officer injured, you can't help but think that a knife's still present. So at this point, I know it's only a second or two to release that strap on the baton, but seconds are quite valuable in situations like that, I suppose. So I think I'll just try to gain any sort of advantage whatsoever, so that I can get my equipment at the fastest opportunity.
Mm. So at that point, en route to Hayfield Road, there was no information available to you that would allow you to exclude the knife as the cause of the injury? to the officer?
Yeah, I had absolutely no information whatsoever what caused the injury, how the officer was injured. So yeah, I still had to go on worst case scenario at that point.
Right. And then you say, I considered maintaining my distance. What do you mean by that?
Again, at this point, I wasn't aware that Mr. Bayo was on the ground, so I had to take into consideration that he was still on his feet, considering his actions, so maintaining your distance if he is still in possession of a knife, or if you suspect he's maybe still in possession of a knife, maintain your distance so that the gap is big enough so that you can keep yourself safe, essentially, and not come into contact with any knife.
Okay. And then you mentioned tactical cover options if this subject was visibly armed with a knife. What are tactical cover options?
That's like your cut principle, I think it was mentioned previously.
Yeah.
So create distance, utilise cover and transmit. So creating distance would be kind of what I touched on there, just maintaining that gap. Utilising cover could be anything, police car, it could be a wall, a hedge, literally anything, any obstacle in the way, to sort of maintain that gap. And transmitting will be transmit what you see on the radio.
Transmit as in send a message or feedback on the airwaves on the radio.
That's correct, yes.
Thanks. And effectively, is this you thinking about your risk assessment and carrying out risk assessment
Yes.
en route to Hayfield Road?
Yeah.
Thank you. And you've said that you were aware an emergency button had been pressed. Can I ask you, as well as that, were you aware of Hayfield Road?
Yes, I was, yes.
Yeah. So you'd spent some time in Kirkcaldy at that stage?
Yes.
You were familiar with the area?
Yeah.
And did it make any difference to your risk assessment that you knew the area?
It certainly helps, I would say. Just having an awareness of where it is, having an awareness of the quickest route to get there, the fact that it's within a built-up area, and that there's various other like hospitals, etc., that are in the area. So yeah, that does help to know the area, absolutely.
So you were aware that there's the Victoria Hospital in the area,
Yeah.
but also the psychiatric hospital, Whiteman's-Brae. And did it cross your mind that this might be someone from Whiteman's-Brae or the hospital?
To be honest, I can't remember at that moment in time if I did consider that. However, certainly if you got to the position where you were able to control the individual and be able to have some sort of dialogue with them, it would probably be at that point that you would be able to start to think about options like that.
So we've heard about the national decision-making model and how people are trying to get more information, new information in, and then go round the cycle of the decision-making.
Yeah.
Is that the sort of thing you were doing?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And at the time you were en route, can you tell us who was in charge of this incident? Who was sort of the senior officer?
I'll probably just say at that point, PS Maxwell. Yeah, I would say him at that moment in time, yeah.
Okay. We've also heard about the area control room and their involvement. There was some communication with them prior to your arrival. What was your understanding of their involvement with this incident at Hayfield Road when you were en route?
It's difficult to remember exactly what my understanding was at that moment in time, but it would probably just be that they were monitoring the fact that there's a knife involved, and they'll obviously see more calls coming in than what's getting distributed to us at the time, so they'll be monitoring the calls as well to be able to assess it properly if what resources are needed.
Do you remember saying anything to Constable Gibson on the way?
The only thing that I remember saying to PC Gibson was something along the lines of, we may have a problem here. And that was, I think that was in sort of response to seeing the emergency button being activated, or I think maybe at that point we'd heard 2 or 3 calls getting relayed to us about the context of the call.
When you say calls, what do you mean?
So the controller will be telling us on the radio that's another call. I think they were using the grade 1, grade 2 calls at that time, so that's another grade 1 call, male walking down Hayfield Road with a knife, something like that.
We've heard that officers on the way couldn't actually hear the 999 calls or the other calls, but they were maybe aware of a number of calls coming in on the way. You were in the same boat?
Yeah.
And then you knew that an emergency button had been activated. Did you know whose it was?
PC Ashley Tomlinson is the one I remember seeing.
Thank you. And do you remember who said an officer had been injured?
I was of the impression that it was PC Craig Walker. I can also see from the sort of the transcripts of the radio messages that it was actually PC Alan Payton, but I think they probably sound quite similar actually in that moment of shouting.
We have heard other evidence from other officers saying they thought it was PC Payton, but would you like to hear that message and see if you can identify him, or are you happy to accept it might be a mistake on your part?
Yeah, I'm happy to accept that it's just my perception at the time.
Right. No, that's fine. Thank you. And can I ask you, as you were approaching Hayfield Road, in paragraph 8 of your inquiry statement, you mentioned that you were anxious. And we've heard evidence from other officers about this and how they were feeling. And I just wonder if you could maybe explain to us your state of mind at that time.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a few, I think anxious is probably the best way to describe how I was feeling at that time. And probably the best way I can describe it is, one, I was able to hear that there was 1 or 2 or 3 calls coming into the police or making us aware of what was happening. The fact that a knife was involved, you'll have heard it before, but there's always a hope that this could be a misunderstanding or a hoax. But when you hear 3 calls coming in of all apparent credible witnesses, all mentioning a knife, you can probably start to think at that point that this is actually happening. The fact that a radio, so a red button activation had been made. I'm also aware now that there was 2, but at the time I was only aware of 1. And that an officer had been injured with no context around it whatsoever. But what I would say as well, so I just kind of touching on what I said previously about mental health calls or an example of a robbery or a disturbance, a fight ongoing with knives. You have an idea of all 3 of them calls, what the intentions are or the motive. So the mental health call, the intent is to harm themselves. Albeit you can't discount that maybe an officer could get injured, but you've got an idea. The robbery, again, the intention is to gain property from another person. Again, you can't discount that an officer could get injured if you come across it, but then you have an idea what the intent was. And the same for the disturbance call, a fight ongoing. The intent is to harm another person who is involved in that disturbance. With this call, it was there was nothing immediately jumping out at you of what is the intent here, and I think that probably adds to the anxiousness.
So it was out of the ordinary for you to attend a call where you couldn't see that intent?
Yeah.
Thank you. And you've told us you were a probationer. You were with PC Gibson. You've had your training, you've got your equipment. Did it make any difference that you were with PC Gibson and that you knew the area and that you had your equipment?
No, it didn't make a difference, but I'd worked a few shifts with him before, so you start to get to understand how other people work. So yeah, it didn't make a difference that I was working with PC Gibson and not PC Walker, for example.
Right. And when you say you'd worked a few shifts with PC Gibson, can you tell us how many, or roughly?
I'm trying to think, because so there would have been 3 months at that point where I was going around the team. Honestly, it's very difficult to say. I'd maybe, if I had to try and put a figure on it, maybe 2 or 3 times a set of shifts.
All right.
Again, it just depends who's on duty. It could be on annual leave for a period of time as well, but yeah. We certainly had worked a few shifts together.
Okay. And then, am I right in saying you're 5 foot 6.5 inches tall?
Yes,
And in May 2015, you were 10 stone 2.
that's correct.
And are you similar today?
11 stone now.
You're the first person that's told me his weight. Thank you. So we've also heard other evidence that the fact that PC Payton and PC Walker were at the scene may have given some others confidence because they were experienced officers. Is that something that crossed your mind or not?
Yeah, I think it would, actually, to some degree. You've also got PC Smith as well. But I would say probably back then that maybe our team had, I can't remember who was all on the other teams at Kirkcaldy, but I would say that our team was quite lucky with quite a lot of experience on it. So yeah, it does make a difference that experienced officers are attending a call of that nature, yeah.
And in a team dynamic, would the team look to those experienced officers to provide guidance or support in some way?
Yeah, certainly with me literally just coming out of college, I've still got a lot to learn, still finding my feet at that point. Absolutely, I will use the advantages of the experienced officers to get advice, guidance, how to deal with certain things. Yeah, so it does reassure you as well.
So you're not seeking that, you're not tapping into just the experience of your tutor constable.
Yeah.
You're tapping into experience of other more senior officers as well. Thank you. We looked at a video footage a moment ago of your arrival in your diary car with Constable Gibson. I'd like to ask you some questions about what happened when you arrived. And it would be maybe helpful if I could show you an image, because you've probably seen some 3D images on the screen. And I think if we look at still images 2 and maybe look at image 4 to begin with. There we go. And we've heard that this is Hayfield Road.
Yeah.
And on the left-hand side would be the roundabout with Henry Road.
Yes.
And we saw you coming round that roundabout in the car. And we've also heard evidence that there's a transit van at the bus stop on Hayfield Road.
Yep.
That was sometimes called the 19.
Yeah.
Behind that, on the same side of the road, was the fish van. That contained Tomlinson and Good when it arrived. The van in the middle of the road facing towards the roundabout was driven by Smith with PC Good in the passenger seat.
Yeah.
And then we see the car on the left-hand side closest to the roundabout. Was that the diary car?
Yes, it was, yes.
So do you think that's a reasonable indication of where your car stopped in Hayfield Road?
Yeah, I would say so, yeah.
When you got out the car, what could you see?
So when I got out the car, I could see, I think it was 4 other officers around Mr. Bio, who was on the ground at this point, just on roughly the pavement, kind of where the dip in the curb is. That's where I remember it roughly to be.
So have you seen other people using the red circles?
Yeah.
So if you touch the screen, you can create a red circle where Mr. Bio was.
Okay.
And if you're not comfortable with that position or you want to adjust it, you can put your finger on it and move it about. Or we can take it away. And if that doesn't work, we can take it away.
Yeah, I'm happy with that position.
Are you happy with
Yeah.
that? So that's on the pavement area near to a hedge at the on Hayfield Road.
Yeah.
And that's where you recollect Mr. Bio being.
Yeah.
And can you tell us, was his head closer to the hedge or further away from the hedge?
His head was certainly pointing towards the hedge. The distance, I'm not entirely sure between the hedge and him. I'm not entirely sure of that, but I would say it was relatively close, maybe a couple of yards.
Mm-hmm. And where were his feet?
His feet were facing the road.
Facing the road. And you've come out the diary car. Was PC Gibson also getting out the diary car with you?
Yes.
You said you saw 4 officers.
Yeah.
Tell us where you saw them.
So I remember seeing is it okay to look at my perk statement first?
Yes, please do. If you'd like, we can look at perk 273.
Yep.
We can have that on the screen. And maybe page 4. And if we look at paragraph 1. So as we finish page 3, it says, I looked down Hayfield Road and saw Nicole Short standing slumped over next to the cell van,
Yep.
which was facing towards Daniel and myself and was about 30 yards away. Nicole was holding her stomach area and she looked distressed. I also saw Kaylee Good walking towards Nicole from the opposite end where it was. She was only a few yards from Nicole. Although I wasn't aware of how bad Nicole's injury was, I felt better when I saw that Kaylee was going to assist her. I then focused my view to the other side of the road, about 10 yards, where Daniel and myself had stopped. I observed a black male lying on the ground. He was wearing a white t-shirt and blue jeans. He was lying on his stomach, face down. I saw that there were officers dealing with this male. The officers were Alan Smith, Craig Walker, Alan Payton and Ashley Tomlinson.
Yeah.
You see that?
Yeah.
Let's go back to the, and we can come back to this statement in a moment, but let's go back to the 3D image that we had. And it was number 4, thank you. So you were going to tell us, so we've got number 1 in the red circle there, where Mr. Bio was. Tell us, you're obviously getting out the diary car.
Yep.
Tell us where the 4 officers were.
So I remember seeing PC Walker on his own knees, round about his the waist of Mr. Bio, facing Gallagher's. So he would have been kind of facing towards me and Dan, essentially, me and PC Gibson. I remember seeing PC Payton near to his head, again just kneeling down, and I saw, or my recollection is that PC Alan Smith was at Mr. Bio's legs, and PC Ashley Thompson was kneeling down round about his head area as well, facing sort of Craig Walker, the PC Walker.
Right. I'm going to take you through that a bit more slowly, if that's okay.
Yep.
So you're looking at a restraint where Mr. Bio's on the ground.
Yeah.
And you said in paragraph 2 on page 4 that he was lying on his stomach face down.
Yep.
And in terms of face down, what did you mean?
Yeah, I didn't literally, I accept that I've probably said this, but I don't literally mean face down to the pavement. I remember his face being facing towards Gallagher's, so his left ear would be sort of touching the pavement.
So not nose on the ground?
No, that's correct, yeah.
Which might be the impression from face down.
Yeah.
We've heard Gallagher's is on the left of image 4.
Yes.
So his left ear was turned towards Gallagher's or the roundabout at that end of Hayfield Road?
Yeah, so his face was pointing towards Gallagher's.
But his stomach was on the ground?
Yes.
Thank you. And then you've talked about PC Walker. Now, was he on the opposite side of Mr. Bio from you or the same side of Mr. Bio?
So he was on the opposite side to me, so if Mr. Bio was on his stomach, PC Walker was on his left side, on his knees, at his waist, facing Gallagher's.
Right. So let's just go through that. So Mr. Bio's on his stomach, face down, facing towards Gallagher's. His head is closest to the hedge. And could you see the front of PC Walker or the back of PC Walker?
The front.
The front. So was he on, as you say, he was on Mr. Bio's left?
Yes.
Yeah. And you described him as being in the waist area of Mr. Bio?
Yeah.
What I'm going to do is ask you at some point to come out and demonstrate, but I'll do it all at once if that's okay.
No problem.
So he was in the waist. Can you describe to us how he was positioned?
He was just on his knees, and I'm not entirely sure what he was doing at that point. I can't say that I stopped long enough to check what he was doing, but he was certainly just on his knees by his side.
Could you see what he was doing with his hands or his arms?
At that point, no.
All right.
No. Later on, I remember, which we'll obviously come
we
to,
can
but
come
at
to that.
at that moment in time, I couldn't see.
Okay. And then PC Peyton, you said,
Yes.
again kneeling near his head. Is that near Mr. Bio's head?
Yes.
So was he closer to the hedge?
Yes, he was.
So he would be to PC Walker's left.
That's correct, yes.
And then you say PC Smith was at Mr. Bio's legs.
Yes.
So was he, as you looked at this, was he on the left as you looked at what was happening?
So PC Smith would have had his back to me, so he would have been on, I think I remember him being on Mr. Bio's right side.
Mr. Bio's right?
Yeah.
In the legs area?
Yeah.
What was he doing?
I remember him just trying to control his legs. They were kicking out at that point, and he was just trying to control them just to prevent him from getting back onto his feet.
Right. And is there anything else you could see PC Smith doing at that moment?
No, not that I can remember.
Okay. And then you've talked about PC Tomlinson kneeling in the head area. Can you explain to us where PC Tomlinson was at that point?
So the head area, I would probably say it's more at his shoulder, like in between sort of the shoulder and head. So he would have been on the same side as PC Smith on the right side of
Right.
Mr. Bio, and I remember him, or my recollection is that he was trying to control his right arm.
Right. So did he have his back to you, PC Tomlinson?
Yes.
So Smith and Tomlinson were on Mr. Bio's right,
Yep.
and Walker was on Mr. Bio's left, and PC Peyton was near to the head area.
Yeah, I would say maybe PC Thompson was maybe more kind of like side on, so that I could see. I can see what he's doing. He's kind of, it's like half back to me, but half side on at the same time. He's
Right.
kind of like angled.
Thank you. I wonder if you could come and demonstrate for us the different positions that you saw people in at that moment.
Yeah, no problem.
I'll just give you their names and ask you to demonstrate, and I'll say it because the audio isn't good in the middle.
Okay.
Thanks. So if you just come in, you'll see a bit of sticky tape on the floor, and if you stick to that, roughly that area. So first of all, if you can demonstrate Mr. Bio's position, please.
Yep. Just kind of like that. I'm not entirely sure where his arms were at this point, but it was
All right.
kind of like that.
So you're lying down on your front, stomach to the front, with your head turned to your right with your left ear on the ground.
Yeah, that's correct.
And you're not sure about your arm position.
Yeah.
And then can we see the position, if you could demonstrate, of PC Walker, first of all?
So just almost imagine that I'm still lying there.
So we imagine that Mr. Bio's lying where you've just demonstrated,
Yeah.
and you're now demonstrating what PC Walker was doing when you
so
arrived.
he's just on his knees, just exactly like this, by his waist. Just imagine that sticky tape there is sort of in line with his waist. He's just at the side of there.
So you're actually on your knees and you're upright.
Yeah.
You're not leaning over at all.
Not at that point, no.
No. And then PC Peyton.
So just to the left of PC Walker, I can't say if he was on his knees. He probably would have been that low to the ground, but just at his head.
Right.
And I'm not entirely sure if he was trying to control an arm or anything at that point. I can't be certain.
So again, you're on your knees, upright, slightly at an angle. That would have been to PC Walker's left.
Yes.
And then PC Smith.
PC Smith was at the other end, just down at his legs, just trying to control them. Again, just on his knees, just trying to control his legs.
Right. And again, you're on your knees, quite upright, but your arms were out towards the legs of or you're demonstrating
Yeah.
Mr. PC Smith.
Yeah.
And then PC Tomlinson.
Just to the right of PC Smith. So angled, so that's what I mean. So I've come in from this direction, so I can kind of see an angle. He's again just on his knees, trying to control the right arm of Mr. Bio.
Right. So again, you're on your knees, you're upright. Was PC Tomlinson's, were his arms forward, trying to control Mr. Bio's arms?
Yeah, so there was a lot of movement at this point, and I can see Mr. Bio trying to lift his arm up, and his kind of position's changing at this point.
We can't get the audio of that, so I'll ask you to come
Yeah,
back to
no
the
problem.
microphone and you can describe that to us. Thank you very much. So you were just about to move on to explain to us the movement that you could see from Mr. Bio when you arrived.
Yeah. So I could see that his legs were sort of lashing out. There was a lot of movement in his legs, which PC Smith was trying to control. And in terms of his upper body, I just remember it being his right arm that PC Thompson was trying to control. He was using that to pull himself up, just like palm to the ground and just trying to lift himself. So his body's kind of tilted at this point.
So you're putting your right palm on the desk in front of you, palm down,
Yeah.
and you're moving your right shoulder in a sort of upward direction. Yeah. And that was going on when you arrived.
Yes.
And thank you. So in terms of the movement of the legs, could you describe that in any more detail?
It's just sort of in that sort of lifting motion to try and lift him up, or he can maybe, I don't know, he can maybe feel PC Smith having control of him. He's maybe trying to escape that sort of grip. But yeah, it was just generally just sort of thrashing out, lifting them up, just repeatedly.
And were all the officers there at that time trying to restrain Mr. Bio to the ground?
The four that I've described, yeah.
Yeah. And would you be able to describe the force that they were using in trying to restrain Mr. Bio?
The force, certainly, it's there was no body weight on them at that point. The force is literally just using their arms to try and keep his legs down and trying to get his arm to put a handcuff on. That's
There were no handcuffs on at that stage,
no,
were there?
no, I don't believe there was.
Or leg restraints?
No.
Now, in your perk statement, you did mention seeing PC Short and PC Good.
Yes.
Perhaps on the image on the screen, you could show us where PC Short was when you arrived.
So I think it's the big transit van. Just try to roundabout. Oh. So it's
Will we take that one away?
so
Maybe just take that away, Miss Wildgoose, and we can just try and touch the screen where you saw her.
yeah, try now.
Sorry, let's try that.
Yeah, so
Right, so
at that
number
side
three.
of the van. Yeah.
Number 3. And so that's what we've been calling the transit van, but you may have mentioned that it was the custody van.
Yeah.
So she's at the passenger side, the near side to the rear.
Yes.
And where was PC Good?
I think I remember her being at PC Short's right hand side, just like sort of facing her.
Were they both in the region of number 3?
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you. Right. What did you do? You've told us how you came out of the diary car, you saw the scene, the restraint going on in Hayfield Road.
Yeah.
Tell us what you did.
So I've got out the car. I can see what I've just described in front of me, and I've went to get my leg restraints that were carried on my vest. So they were here on
Your-
like a
your
a plastic
left-hand
zip.
side?
Yeah, so they were there. I think I maybe said in my statement that I've announced that I'm going to do that, but that may be the case. That's my recollection anyway. But I've seen that the legs need to be restrained, so I've taken my leg restraints out of the holder.
Tell us who you're standing near.
I'm standing near PC Smith. I remember being nearby at that point.
To his left or right?
So I would have been to his left.
His left.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you would look at some leg restraints for us.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've heard these are called fast straps.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah.
And you recognise
Yeah.
these?
They're all the same.
And did you have two fast straps?
Yeah. So they come as up here in one packet.
And you had them with you that day on your left-hand side of your utility belt?
That's correct.
And can you just show us how you unravelled them?
Just kind of, well, they're kind of stored in such a way that you can unravel them quickly. So you've got the green tips, and it's just a case of pulling them out, and you can just go like that with them.
All right.
And they extend to obviously its full length.
Right. So you've told us you were to the left of PC Smith.
Yeah.
What did you do with Mr. Bio's legs?
So I think I've come round to the other side so that I'm on the same side as PC Walker.
Right.
And he's still kicking out at this point. So I'm trying to put his legs into a position that's safer, so that it's harder for him to kick out. And I think I remember tilting his ankles slightly to a slight angle, so that his toes are kind of pointing towards the roundabout. And that's purely just so that it's more difficult to get any strength because your muscles are, or muscles of your legs are kind of at an angle. It's harder to get more strength. It's more difficult to get the strength to be able to kick
Right.
out. So that's
So
what I remember doing.
His knees weren't facing the ground at that point.
They're-
You've tilted them.
Yeah, it's just really his ankles that I've kind of tilted using like the natural movements of like your ankle just to tilt them to the side.
And they're facing towards Gallagher's pub.
Yeah, more or less, yeah.
And you're on Walker's side this time.
Yes.
And what was PC Smith doing?
PC Smith was assisting me with placing the leg restraints on, but I think he was still beforehand moving these, helping me positioning these legs essentially so we can get the fast straps on effectively.
And how did you go about trying to get the fast straps on?
So I remember putting them under his legs just above the knee. So you put one leg restraint above the knee to basically control sort of your strongest muscle in the leg, the thighs. So it went underneath his legs so that they come up over the top of the legs.
How difficult was that, getting it under his legs?
That was quite difficult because there was still a lot of movement in his legs. You're trying to obviously not get your fingers crushed or kind of stuck in between the pavement and his legs. So it was quite difficult to do that. But we got there, and I remember sort of pulling him round, or PC Smith pulled the other end round, and I think it was actually PC Smith that I remember tightening the leg restraints.
Right. So you got the leg restraint under his, the lower part of his thigh above his knee, did you say?
Yes, that's correct.
But it was PC Smith that sort of pulled them together?
Yeah.
And when you say we got there, are you talking about you and PC Smith?
Yes.
What did you do then?
I've then moved down to his ankle. I remember PC Gibson, he was sort of lying across his legs and he's shuffled down as I've got the leg restraints on, and then we went to his ankles and just done the exact same procedure. But I think possibly it was, I remember it being me that's tightened them around his ankles at that point.
So I wonder if you could explain, you've talked about PC Smith and what he was doing and moving the leg straps under Mr. Bio's legs. Where was PC Gibson when you were trying to do that?
So PC Gibson would have been, he's just sort of lying across his legs, using his sort of torso. So PC Gibson's legs are out to the side, so they're nowhere near Mr. Bio. It's just his torso, and you kind of, and when you're lying across him, you almost like cuddle the legs in, and then once that leg restraint went on, he's moved down the body to then bring in the lower part of his shins, that area, to bring them in closer, the exact same procedure.
Could you show us the way that PC Gibson was lying when you were at the legs trying to help with the leg straps?
Absolutely.
Thank you. So if we imagine Mr. Bio on the ground,
just the same sort of format,
same position, and show us where PC Gibson was.
He was feet towards Gallagher's, and he's kind of just leaning over him like that.
Right.
So he's trying to pull in his legs.
Right. So your hips and your legs are on the ground.
Yep.
Your right shoulder is up. You've got your right palm flat down on the ground.
Yeah.
And so from your earlier description, that's over the legs of Mr. Bio.
Yes.
PC Walker would be to the left of PC Gibson. Sorry, PC Walker's on the other side to the right. And PC Smith was in the leg area. To the left of Gibson.
Yes.
And PC Tomlinson was to his right.
So he would be
here.
Yeah.
To his right on this side. And PC Payton would be behind PC Gibson.
Yes.
And Walker is behind PC Gibson.
Yes.
On the other side.
Yeah.
And where were you at this point?
I was on the same side as PC Walker, so just kind of in front of, well, I would have been, to get the first leg restraint on, up at the knee, I would have been probably slightly behind PC Gibson. and then as we've moved down to the ankle, I probably would have been in front of them at that point.
Right. Again, I'll get you to repeat that when you're in front of the microphone, but I think we've got your position now. Thank you. So when you put on the first leg restraint, you
Yep.
said when you were doing your demonstration, you were slightly behind PC Gibson.
Yes.
So was PC Gibson further down the legs than you were when you were trying to put on the first leg restraint?
Yes, because he's got to control the lower part of the legs and give us access to the upper leg to be able to get feed the restraint through.
Right. And do you remember how PC Gibson moved down the legs after you got the first leg restraint on?
My recollection was that he's kind of shuffled down the legs.
He said there was two possibilities, a sausage roll or a shuffle.
Yeah.
Your recollection is it was a shuffle.
Yeah.
And then how did the second leg restraint, the fast strap, get put on?
So it was just around the ankles. It was same procedure.
You've told us you moved slightly in front of PC Gibson.
Yeah, that's
now.
correct. You generally find it's a wee bit easier to do the ankles because they're slightly raised off the ground a wee bit. So it's easier to feed it through from underneath. And I remember it being myself who has fed it through and tightened the straps.
So it was you that tightened the ankle
Yes.
fast straps.
Yeah.
Were they still pointing towards Gallagher's pub at that stage?
Yes, they were.
Thank you. Can I ask you to look at your PERC statement, please? Page 4. So let's just look at this in a little bit more detail. I think there's some alterations you'd like to make on this page.
Yeah.
So you, just to finish where we were before, we can move on. Alan Smith was on his knees and he was attempting to control the male's legs as he was struggling.
Yeah.
It looked like the male was attempting to evade detention. Craig Walker was also on his knees and he was facing towards me. I can't recall exactly what Craig was doing, but he was in the male's waist area. Alan Payton was also on his knees and was next to the male's head, and he was attempting to control the male's left arm, and the male was struggling violently as if attempting to escape. Ashley Tomlinson was also kneeling at the male's head, but with his back to me, he was attempting to control the male's right arm. Even though there were 4 officers dealing with the male, it still looked like they were struggling due to the male's muscular and aggressive manner. So I decided to go and assist them. I did not speak to Daniel about my thoughts, and I just assumed he was thinking the same as myself, as we both got out of our vehicle at the same time and went to the assistance of our colleagues. And if we can carry on up the page. So you then say, as I approached the male, I did look over towards Nicole, who was with Kaylee, and I'll move on from that and read that short. I immediately went to Alan Smith's assistance and got hold of the male's left leg. I was on my knees at this time. I grabbed the male's ankle with both of my hands. Alan Smith had a hold of the male's other leg. The male still appeared to have a lot of strength left in his legs as I was struggling to control him. Can I ask you, you say there that you'd got hold of the male's left leg and
Yeah.
Alan Smith had a hold of his other leg, presumably his right leg. Is that what you've described today?
Yeah, so I think what I'm trying to explain there is we've both got a leg each and we're trying to bring them into the middle so that we can make it as tight as possible for the leg restraints to be effective.
And you did say earlier that you'd come round, so you got his left leg, Mr. Bio's left leg, and
Yes.
Mr. Smith had his right leg.
Yes.
Thank you. And then I looked at my colleagues and saw that Daniel Gibson was trying to control the male's upper body. He was holding the male's arm. The male was still struggling, and even though Daniel and myself were assisting, we were all having difficulty controlling the male. Now, is that something you want to comment on?
Yeah, so it's always been my position that PC Gibson assisted with the legs. I maybe have stated at the time with Park, But it's always been my position that I remember PC Gibson assisting with the legs. I think it's just an error.
So it's an error. It wasn't Daniel Gibson trying to control the male's upper body. He was helping with the legs.
Yes, that's correct.
So insofar as this differs from your evidence today, the chair should prefer your evidence today and not this.
That's correct.
Thank you. And then the final paragraph. I saw that handcuffs had been placed on the male's left wrist. However, the others were having difficulty getting the male's right wrist into the handcuffs. I can't recall if the male was saying or shouting anything during the struggle. I then said to Alan Smith that I was going to put leg restraints on the male. Alan then grabbed hold of the male's leg that I was holding, which allowed me to get my leg restraints from my vest. I then put them around the male's legs, just above his knees, and with Alan's help managed to secure them around the male's legs. It helped our situation and the male stopped kicking out as violently as he had been. Can we just go back and look at that final paragraph on page 4? I saw the handcuffs had been placed on the male's left wrist. However, the others were having difficulty getting the male's right wrist into the handcuffs.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah, so that's still my recollection to this date. So when we first got out of the car, I didn't see the handcuffs. But as the point of approach to take my position at the legs to prepare the straps, I then remember seeing a handcuff ring on his left wrist. I didn't actually see it being applied. I just remember having a look and could see it.
So at the point you're at the legs, dealing with the leg restraints, or about to deal with leg restraints,
Yeah.
you then notice that one handcuff has been applied.
Yeah.
Or to one wrist, I should say.
Yeah.
Right. But not to both wrists at that point.
No.
And then Alan assists, that's Alan Smith, assists you with securing the leg that you had, which was, I think, the left leg.
Yes.
Thank you. And then can we look just further down onto the next page? I then took the other leg restraints I had. They come in a pair and pulled them around the male's ankle area. This prevented the male kicking out and the threat of violence on my colleagues and myself was reduced. At this point, I became aware of a male and female CID officer. I don't know their names. One of them, I can't recall which one, said, "Have you recovered a knife?" I said that the two CID officers had got out of a silver Corsa motor car, which was parked near to the cell van, where PC Short and Good had been standing. Now, again, I think, do you want to talk about the order here of what's happening?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So once the leg restraints were on, we had placed Mr. Bio on his left side. So my position still remained at the legs, just sort of make sure he didn't roll over onto his front again, or just having a hold of his legs so that he was in place. I could still feel at that point that there was movement in his legs, sort of the muscles tensing up, like pulling against the straps. I remember at that point, I'm not sure who it was, but somebody has searched him for the knife. I couldn't tell you who it was. And it was round about that point that I heard one of the Allens, either PC Alan Smith or PC Payton, stating that he's motionless. And it was at that point that I felt his legs becoming, I would say, limp.
Right. All right. So let's just go back for a moment. You've put on the ankle straps.
Yep.
And at that point, what do you do once you've put on the ankle straps?
I've just remained on the same side as PC Walker, so Mr. Bio's left side, but at his legs still, round about the knee area, the thigh area, and he's been rolled onto his left side so that his chest is facing Gallagher's.
Who rolls him onto his left side?
I can't remember who exactly what it was, but I was one of them, and I don't want to assume, but I can only assume that it would have been PC Walker because he was next to me, so he would have the upper body. It's just a case of the shoulder and the hip, and using that as a natural rotation to pull him onto his side.
What was the position with the handcuffs?
Honestly, don't know. I'm not aware of both handcuffs being on. I can't even remember what position these arms were in at that point. I think I've just been so focused on dealing with the legs, with the leg restraints, that I've just not looked. And honestly, I just cannot remember what the position was with the handcuffs at that point.
When he was rolled onto his left-hand side, where was PC Smith?
He was on the opposite side to me. I would say round about his stomach area.
Mr. Bio's stomach area.
Yeah.
What was PC Smith doing?
I'm not entirely sure. I can't remember him having hands on him at that point. I don't know if he was just monitoring. I'm not entirely sure.
Can we look at paragraph 26 of your inquiry statement, please? And you were asked about Mr. Bio's reaction to the restraint and at what point he stopped breathing. And you say Mr. Bio was actively resisting by kicking out and pulling against being handcuffed. I cannot recall him saying anything, however I vaguely remember him aggressively groaning whilst kicking out and lifting his body. What did you mean lifting his body?
So with his right arm that I've described PC Thompson trying to restrain, using that as leverage to try and lift his upper body up.
Lift his chest,
Yeah.
trying to lift his chest off the ground.
Yeah.
And you're gesturing again, you're putting your right palm down on the desk and moving your right shoulder in an upward direction. I cannot remember at what point he stopped breathing. However, I remember while I was monitoring his legs, I could still feel his legs moving, although the fast straps were on him. Suddenly, his legs stopped moving. At that point, I recall someone saying, "He's motionless." You've said you were monitoring his legs. At what stage were you monitoring his legs?
So he had just been rolled onto his side, his left-hand side.
Right.
And when I say monitoring, I just mean making sure that he's not going to roll back onto their side because his legs were still moving at that point. Just keeping them in place, really.
Making sure he wasn't going to roll back onto his front.
Yeah, and just making sure that the leg restraints were doing what they're there to, their purpose, serve their purpose.
So the fast straps were on him at that time. Both sets of fast straps were on him.
Yes.
And then you say suddenly his legs stopped moving. How long after you applied the ankle straps, so the second set, did you notice that his legs had stopped moving?
So he's been rolled onto his side, so from there on, sorry, you're asking from the moment they were applied or from the moment he was rolled onto his side?
From the moment they were applied.
I'd probably say a minute to two.
Could it have been a shorter period?
It could have been. I'm not entirely sure. It's not something that I was thinking about at the time, so it could have been shorter.
We've heard from others that these events took place over a very short period of time.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that impression?
Yeah, absolutely.
And someone said he's motionless. You don't remember who that was, do you?
No, I just have this recollection that it was either PC Alan Payton or PC Alan Smith.
Mm-hmm.
I can't quite I can't. I've thought about it a lot, and I can't say for certain who it was.
Okay. You say, I stood back and I recall PC Smith or Peyton checking Mr. Bio and saying that he was breathing.
Yeah.
About that time, I remember an ambulance was called for.
Yeah.
So we've got an airwaves transmission about this, that
Yeah.
he's unconscious at this stage and an ambulance is called. But you said, I stood back. What did you do?
So at that point, he's then been placed on his back. So one of the sorry, I've said that PC Peyton said that he was still breathing, so he's been placed on his back. I've just taken a step back. I was satisfied that the leg restraints were working at that moment in time, and the fact that someone said that he's not breathing, I just thought it was relevant just to take a step back, just to allow what needs to take place to check for breathing and that sort of thing, medical assistance.
So it became a first aid situation at that stage.
Yeah.
And he needed to have some air, Mr. Bio. And you've mentioned that you were to do traffic control at some point.
Yes.
So who's there at that point when you've stepped back or stood back to give air? Who was there at the scene? You've also mentioned other CID officers being present.
Yes. So I remember. So the original officers that we've already discussed, they were still there. I remember PS Maxwell was in the area as well, and DS Samantha Davidson and DC Derek Connell.
DC Connell.
Yeah.
And are Davidson and Connell the CID officers that you
Yeah.
mentioned? Samantha Davidson's a female officer and Connell's the
Yeah,
male.
I think I said that.
You said
in my
that
part
in
statement
your...
I didn't know their names, but I now
You now know
it's them,
who they
obviously,
are. And where was Sergeant Maxwell?
I just remember him standing up, roughly just in front of the car, but standing so at the feet of Mr. Bio.
When you say the car, do you mean your diary
Yeah,
car?
sorry, the car that me and PC Gibson travelled in.
Right. He was at the feet area at that point.
Yeah.
And where was Samantha Davidson?
I think roughly in the general area of where PS Maxwell was. It could be that they were discussing things. I'm not entirely sure, but she was certainly in that vicinity.
And we've heard that later PC Smith noticed that he was no longer breathing.
Mm-hmm.
You weren't with Mr. Bio at that time.
No, I'd actually walked away at that point.
And what were you doing at that point then?
So I was round about that point where I've kind of taken the opportunity to look for the knife that was still unaccounted for, and it's probably just purely by chance. I've taken a look over my right shoulder, seen on the grass area on the other side of the road, and I can only describe it as, from where I was standing, it looked like the inside of a crisp packet, like the shiny sort of foil.
Mm-hmm.
And then I've just, curiosity got the better of me, went and had a look and found a knife lying on the grass.
I'll come back to your perk statement again in a moment because I know you want to change one other thing. But can we maybe look at some still images first of all?
Yep.
8, 9 or 10. And right, let's start with number 8.
Yep.
And I'll ask Miss Wildgoose to put a red circle in the area I'm interested on the left-hand side.
Yep.
You'll see an item there. It's very small on image 8.
Yep.
And then can we look at image 9, please? This is taken from a different angle. So this is the other side. You'll see on the bottom right-hand side of this image, you can see something small on the grassy area.
Yeah.
And then image 10, again. You'll see it's on the left-hand side. This is the closest to the roundabout.
Yep.
And you'll see a small white image there.
Yeah.
We don't have the facility to zoom in on that at the moment, but we have heard evidence that that was a knife. Is that the area where you located the knife that you've described?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. Can I go back finally to your perk statement on page 5? And it's just before we finish at this point, it's paragraphs 3 to 6. And I understand that you'd like to comment on the order in which things happened. If we just deal with this quickly, if we start with paragraph 3, you say, at this point I became aware of a male-female CID officer. We mentioned that a moment ago. You say, I had a glance around the male and I couldn't see any knife. My colleagues were still trying to secure the handcuffs on the male. I decided to stand up and have a look for the knife as Alan Smith and myself had secured the leg restraints. What did you mean when you said that the colleagues were still trying to secure the handcuffs on the male?
I was of the impression at the time that the handcuffs hadn't been applied. I don't remember. I can't remember if one handcuff had only been applied or if both of them were on at that point. Generally, if you've got one handcuff ring only applied to one wrist, that's essentially a weapon at that point. So I would like to think that the other wrist had been placed in the handcuffs, but honestly I do not know if that was the case.
We've heard that it can take time to double lock handcuffs to make sure they don't become smaller.
Yeah.
And hurt the person's wrist. When you say they were trying to secure the handcuffs, could they have been on but needing double locked, or
Potentially. There's every chance. Honestly, I cannot remember what I've meant by that, if it's the other handcuff ring or double locking them. I can't quite remember.
you don't remember
No.
now? And then you say, I decided to stand up and have a look for the knife, which
Yep.
you've just told us. Throughout the whole incident, the man was lying on the pavement. I looked over to the grassy area on the opposite side of the road where the male was and saw something shiny. I said this to the CID officers and I walked towards the item. The male CID officer came with me. That's, you now know to be DC Connell.
Yeah.
When I got to the grass area, I saw that there was a knife lying about 3 yards in. It was a silver one with a silver steel handle. The blade was about 5 or 6 inches in length. I didn't say anything to the CID officer. I just turned and went back over to assist my colleagues. I saw that nothing had changed. He was still struggling with his upper body and was still handcuffed on one wrist only. I can't recall if any of my colleagues were giving instructions to the male. I decided to stand back as I thought I would get in the way and hinder my colleagues. Although I've said I didn't want to hinder my colleagues, I did kneel down at his feet and I still took hold of his legs. However, due to the leg restraints, he was unable to kick out. He was able to move his legs slightly with the leg restraints, and I could still feel the muscles in his legs tensing up. I then recall suddenly his legs not moving, and I'm not sure who said it, but somebody said he was motionless. Now, I think, having looked at this perk statement again, you have concerns about the order in which this reads.
Yeah.
And would you like to clarify for the chair, because obviously the order you've given us of events today differs from this paragraph.
Yeah. So in this paragraph here that's just been read out, it reads as if Mr. Byle's still struggling and I've walked away from the struggle to then look for the knife and come back to assist the struggle. That's an error. That's simply not what happened. I wouldn't walk away from somebody who's still struggling, if that makes sense. That's the best way to describe it. So how I've described the events before you've read out this paragraph is the actual events that I remember and what should have been in the perk statement.
So the chronology of events you've given us today in evidence is the correct version?
Yes.
And that should be preferred?
Yes.
So unlike other people who you've heard where I've said you prefer the perk statement That's not the case with this paragraph for
It's
you?
just this one paragraph, really, yeah.
All right, thank you. Would that be an appropriate?
You mean the point for a break? Well, we'll take a break for 15 to 20 minutes. Yes, Ms Graham.
Thank you. I'd like to just, before I leave your statement, your PERC statement, ask you a little bit about the circumstances that have caused you to make these alterations or make these comments. So the PERC statement is the 4th of June, and that might be coming up on the screen, but you've got it in front of you. And you said that you thought it had been read over to you on that date.
Yeah.
And then you gave your inquiry statement on the 1st of May.
Yeah.
Or you agreed that it would be there or thereabouts. Can you, obviously your senior counsel had a word with me yesterday, so I knew that you wanted to make these alterations in advance of today. But could you explain to the chair why you didn't make the alterations sooner?
Yeah. I hadn't seen my PERC statement by this point. Simply due to I didn't want to read it. I didn't want to go over sort of the memories again, but I am also dyslexic as well. So there is a tendency for me to get things in the wrong order, or just make sort of minor errors that I might pick up on at a later time. So that's sort of the two main reasons why.
Right. So when you gave your inquiry statement, had you read your PERC statement by then?
I don't think I did at that point. I can't remember reading it at that point, just purely because I was worried, I suppose, to read it. I didn't want to sort of relive it again, but I accepted the fact I was going to have to at some point.
And when was that point?
I think it was probably a few days after, once I'd given the inquiry statement.
All right, thank you. Can I go back to your inquiry statement, please? Yeah. And I'd like to look at paragraph 26, if that's possible. Now, I asked you about this earlier. And if we could look at paragraph 1 of answer 26. You'll remember that I read out, Mr. Bile was actively resisting by kicking out and pulling against being handcuffed. I cannot recall him saying anything. However, I vaguely remember him aggressively groaning whilst kicking out and lifting his body. And you describe him as groaning. Can you just give us a little more description of the groaning?
Yeah, I'll probably say the best way to describe it would be if you're lifting something heavy, like a piece of furniture, or at the gym working out, and to assist you lifting whatever it is that you're lifting, you would generally sort of like exhale or give it a little bit of a groan to sort of assist you with lifting. So that's probably how I would describe it.
Are you able to replicate that today?
I think it's difficult to, because I'm not in the moment. I feel like I would need to be at the gym, for example, or lifting something heavy. I don't feel comfortable about doing it. It just doesn't sit right. I'm not trying to be awkward. It's just I just don't know how I would do it.
All right. And you describe that as aggressively. What was it about the groaning that was aggressive?
Sort of the loudness, the tone, just how loud it actually is. I wouldn't say loud that like the whole street could hear it, but it was enough for me to think that he's trying to get out of the restraint, out of the detention.
Is it possible that he was actually struggling to breathe at that stage?
I don't know. There was nothing verbally coming from him. I didn't personally see him gasping for air or making any verbal comments. It was just that groan that I described.
And what would you have expected if someone had been gasping for air?
I probably expect maybe some sort of communication. I can't breathe, or just something, get off me, something like that. That's probably what I would maybe expect to hear.
So in the absence of that, you didn't think he was struggling to breathe?
No, at that point as well, I'm solely focused on his legs, so I feel like I'm not in a position to make that sort of judgment when I'm at the other side of his body.
Do you know if anyone at that time, when he was prone, if anyone was monitoring his breathing?
I can't remember. I can't remember at that point. I do remember at one point PC Alan Payton being at his head, but I think that was at the point of when he was on his side.
Sorry, say that again. I didn't quite.
So not at that point when I first turned up in the car, but more that to the point he was on his left-hand side after the leg restraints had been applied. I was aware of PC Alan Payton being at his head at that point.
And we may have heard that PC Smith was at some point anyway, once he's on his side, monitoring the situation. Is that something you were aware of?
Yeah, I was aware of it was either PC Alan Smith or PC Alan Payton. I couldn't remember which one, but they were both in that vicinity.
Okay. And you mentioned about expecting, or you would have expected someone to say, I can't breathe, or get off me. Was it your expectation that someone who's maybe struggling to breathe would be able to say those things?
I honestly don't know. I've never been in that position myself, I suppose. There was never like a pile of bodies on top of him. So I think if I maybe expected to see several people on top of him, I would maybe more inclined to think that way.
All right, thank you. I'd like to move on to some enhanced Snapchat footage that we have, which I hope is available. You may have seen this with other witnesses, Constable McDonough, and you'll know that this is two sort of clips. One is just 100% speed. On the left, you'll see the Snapchat footage that's been incorporated into the evidence video timeline. And on the right, it's a 400% zoom of that. And then the second time it plays at 25% speed. I'm going to play the full thing through, and then I'm going to ask you some questions. You'll have seen me ask questions of other officers about who was where and what was happening at the time. And I'm going to do the same with you. So let's just watch this whole thing, please. Right, with Miss Wildgood's assistance, we'll move to the 25% speed, and we stop it at the beginning of that. Thank you. And we'll just play this for a few seconds, and then I'm going to ask you some questions about who's where.
Yep.
Right, if we stop it there, please. Right, you can see an officer on the right-hand side, on the 400% zoom side of the screen, you can see an officer standing up with his back to the camera.
Yeah.
And do you know who that was?
That looks like PC Gibson.
PC Gibson.
Yeah.
And then to his left, we can see an officer with his back to the the camera?
Yeah, so you also can't identify who that is there, but I can tell from the body vest that he's wearing that it was different to everyone else. That's PC Alan Payton.
Right, we've heard evidence that PC Payton's vest was slightly different to others.
Yeah.
In what way was it different?
It was like it was in the. It was almost like a. It's really difficult to explain. It was like it's so the vest that myself is wearing, PC Gibson is wearing, it looks like it's just all in one vest. Whereas I seem to remember his was in panels with various attachments attaching to the other panels.
Okay.
So on his you can see sort of little black bits.
Uh-huh.
I think that's his the vest underneath the cover, whereas we don't have that. We've got, it's just the yellow's wrapped all the way around, if that makes sense. So that's how I determined it. It's different to everyone else's.
So your high-vis vest was complete, and his was in segments.
Yeah, aye.
And then to his left,
That's PC Alan Smith.
and then to PC Smith's left, standing up, facing the camera. Who's that?
That's me.
That's you.
Yeah.
And we'll watch this again for another few seconds as PC Gibson walks round. Thank you. If we pause it there, and we can see someone on the other side,
Yep.
facing the camera. Who's that?
That would be PC Tomlinson.
And we can see a leg or a foot between PC Gibson's legs
Yeah.
on the ground.
Yep.
And then between the camera and PC Tomlinson, we can see a dark area there. And there appears to be a white band or a paler coloured strip.
Yep.
Do you know what that was?
It's difficult to say from there, however, that could be sort of the legs of PC Walker.
So the legs of PC Walker. And what is it about the strip, the pale coloured strip, that makes you say that?
I just thought maybe it'd be like the waist, like a waistband of some sort, or a piece of clothing underneath the vest, or I don't know. It seems to be in that general area.
So we've heard that, can we actually see part of a yellow high-vis vest and then a dark area
Yeah.
and then the light area?
Yeah.
We may have heard evidence that the body armour, the black part, can ride up and your clothing underneath can poke out above
Yeah.
your trousers. Is that your experience?
Yeah, that is, yes.
All right, thank you. And the car behind there, is that the diary car?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. So what was happening at this moment?
So at that moment, I don't know how long me and PC Gibson were out the car for by this point, but I could see from where I'm standing, I could see that his legs were struggling at that point. So you can actually see on the footage me taking out the leg restraints from my vest.
Yeah.
So it's at that point that I'm doing that.
Let's watch that again. I was hoping you would say that. Let's watch that again. And let's look at you as we watch this and see what you're doing. And just there, is that you removing something from your left-hand side?
It is, yes, and it's the leg restraints.
Is that your leg restraints?
Yes.
And we could maybe look at that again just for a moment. And that's what you described earlier for us this morning.
Yeah.
And let's just watch that again, please. So is that you taking them out now and
Yeah.
unfurling them, or
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. Thank you. That's great. So that was just prior to you actually getting involved with applying those leg restraints. Thank you. And then can we look at the evidence video timeline, please? And I'd like to look at it from 7:25:34. Now, I'm going to ask you to watch around 2.5 minutes of the footage. And if you could focus on the CCTV, and you will see some movement in the area of the roundabout.
Yeah.
So I'll play it in full. We'll finish about 7:28, just after 7:28, and then I'll come back and ask you some questions.
Yep.
For your benefit, it starts at page 7 on the spreadsheet. And we're going to start at 7:25:34. And you'll see it says the larger marked police van appears to move forwards further up Hayfield Road. And then a small light coloured car approaches the roundabout from the South Henry Road and slows at the entrance to the roundabout. Do you have that?
Yeah.
And then it says a person can be seen walking towards the roundabout on the path on North Hayfield Road near the grassy area.
Yeah.
And then you'll see at 7:25:51 a second person walks across to the roundabout from Hayfield Road and joins the other person near the grass area.
Yeah.
So this is the part of the footage I'm going to play to you.
Okay.
And I'll come back and ask you some questions.
Perfect.
Thanks.
Good up the money to the with the mill. For 411.
Go ahead.
So to clarify, has an ambulance been contacted for a accused also over?
Roger, we've asked for 2 ambulances to Seafield Road.
Just for the log, initial in attendance, this male was attacked, PC shot quite violently. As a result, he was sprayed with CS and plather and battened. There may be a suggestion that he has been battened to the head area. 4-1 over.
Roger.
Delta 18 to the hospital. Last unit, go ahead. Yeah, so the dog handler on head and prevent for that. This guy doing the training is still required. I've got him under control now, thanks.
Look at this. This is just not your average.
Yeah, that's received, thank you.
Control from Alpha 10.
Go ahead.
I noticed on the call card it's got Seafield Road. It's actually Hayfield Road. H-A-Y, Hayfield.
Thank you. Did you have the chance to see that CCTV?
Yeah, I did, yeah.
Right, let's go back. We might use the spreadsheet actually to help us with this. Page 7 first of all.
Yep.
And we'll go back to 7:25:38. Or thereabouts. That would be fine. And let's just look at this, a few seconds of this. So this is it. Right, if we pause it there for the moment, do we see some movement heading towards the roundabout on North Hayfield Road near to the grassy area?
Yes.
Do you know who that is?
That will be me.
That was you.
Yeah.
And then, can we keep playing, please, Miss Wildgoose? And then we see some further movement just behind the car. The car will move out the way. Right, pause that there, please. So we see 2 people, or movement of 2 people there. Who's that?
I think that's going to be DC Derek Connell. I think it was him that I made him aware of what I'd seen.
So which one's you? There's one on the left and one on the right with a lighter coloured.
Yeah, I think I'm going to be the one on the right because of the fluorescent vest, the lighter coloured one.
You had your high-vis vest on.
Yeah, that's correct.
So you're on the right there, and that's you in the area of the grass area near the roundabout
Yes.
with DC Connell.
Yeah.
And is this at the point at which you see the knife?
Yes, that's correct.
And then can we just play that again for a moment or two? And then the two people appear to be walking back away from the roundabout, away from the grass area. And can you pause that there, please? Where were you going at that stage?
I was just going back to the area where all the other officers were. For what purpose, I don't know. But it was round about that time I got asked to go and do traffic control.
All right. And can we look at 727.18, please? Sorry, just, and what we'll do is you'll see on the page 8 of the spreadsheet, 727.18 says a person can be seen walking towards the roundabout from Hayfield Road and approaching the grassy area to the north.
Yeah.
And then the person at the grassy area appears to pause near the north end of the roundabout. Do you see that?
Yeah.
So let's just watch a few seconds to see if we can see that. And we can now see some movement of a person heading back to the same grassy area.
Yeah.
And if we pause it there, sorry, we could see at the very top of the Snapchat,
Yep.
and we can replay it if you didn't glimpse it, but there was a person with a blue jacket on. Maybe
Yeah.
we could rewind that ever so slightly. Pause it there. So we just can glimpse them through the Venetian blinds at the very top of that Snapchat
Yep.
element. And they appear to have a blue jacket on. Was that DC Connell?
Yeah, it was. And you can actually see him before he walks over there. He goes into the boot. So he's seeing the Snapchat footage there.
Yeah.
The top right hand corner, you see the silver Corsa. But in the CCTV, you actually see movement in the boot. And you can see in the Snapchat footage as well that I'm actually looking in that general direction. And
Right.
if I mind right, he's taking production bags to where the knife was.
Let's rewind that slightly just so we can see that. So we'll start it when the Snapchat starts. We'll maybe try and pause it at that
Last unit, go ahead. Yeah, so the dock handler I'm heading from Edinburgh. This guy doing the training. So.
I think this is, yeah. Right, I think it's further back than that, maybe to 24 seconds. Right, let's watch it from there, please. And if you could see him at the boot, if you could point that out, please.
I think he's at the boot at the moment, but you'll see the actual boot closing when he walks away.
Can you point to the area that you're looking at, please, just so everyone can see it?
Yeah. Can you draw on this? But yeah,
Yes, you can.
just in there.
Right. So everyone can focus their attention
Yeah.
there. So let's remove that, please, Miss Wildgoose, and people can focus their attention. So that's the rear of a Corsa.
Yeah, that's correct.
Right. Do you know who'd been driving that car?
I'm not entirely sure. I would take a bet that it would be either DC Connell or DS Samantha Davidson, but I'm not
so
too sure.
it was Davidson or Connell.
Yeah.
Right. So let's just play that for a couple of seconds, please, and we'll see if we can see the person moving from the boot.
For 4-on-1.
Go ahead.
So to clarify, has an ambulance been contacted for a fused also over?
Roger, we've asked for 2 ambulances to Seafield Road.
Just for the log, initial in attendance, this male was attacked, PC shot quite violently. As a result, he was sprayed with CS and cover and battened. There may be a suggestion that he has been battened to the head area. 4-1 over.
Roger. Delta 1-8 to Milton.
And then can we pause it there? Do we see somebody now moving away from that area?
Yeah.
Containing or holding what appears to be something light coloured.
Yeah.
And you've talked about evidence bags?
Yeah, I think that's what that is.
That's what that is. So that's DC Connell holding an evidence bag.
Yeah.
And then just within a few seconds we should see the Snapchat arriving by 31 seconds past. We can play till that. We can watch. So DC Connell appears to be travelling back to the grassy area. And if we pause it there, so we can see on the CCTVs in the grassy area with the evidence bag, and then just at the very top of this Snapchat footage, we can see him just still on the road at this point.
Yeah.
With a blue jacket on, and he may be carrying the evidence bag there.
Yeah.
And we'll just play that. Thank you.
I've got him under control
And then
now.
thank you. And then that's him just out of view of the person with the camera.
Yeah.
Thank you. And then can I ask you to look at 727.54? And you'll see that on the spreadsheet, this is on page 9, 727.54 to 59, it says the person near the grassy area stops approaching Hayfield Road and pauses. It appears like a light coloured object is raised up by their arms.
Yep.
And then the person near the grassy area returns to where they were a few moments ago, and another person walks towards them from Hayfield Road area. The second person stops near the roundabout. A person can be seen walking away from the group of officers on the pavement on Hayfield Road and walking further up Hayfield Road away from the roundabout. So let's just play this footage.
Alpha 10.
Go ahead.
I noticed on the call card it's got Seafield Road. It's actually Hayfield Road. It's
Can we pause it there for a second? Who's that person coming to the roundabout?
I think that's PC Good.
PC Good. And DC Connell is still in the area of the grassy area.
Yeah.
And you saw the image of the knife. That
Yep.
is a photograph of what was found at that area.
Yes.
And if we could just carry on playing that, please.
Hayfield Road.
Yankee, Hotel Alpha Yankee.
So again, in the Snapchat, we could see an image of DC Connell's bright blue jacket.
Yeah.
It's not on the screen there, it was just a moment ago. And again, he still seems to be in the grassy area.
Yep.
And if we could maybe rewind that slightly. There, oh perfect. We see DC Connell, bright blue jacket in the grassy area.
Yeah.
And where were you at this point?
I think I've actually made my way to carry out traffic duties.
Where did you do that?
So so where you can see the officers there in the Snapchat footage, to the right down towards the general direction of the hospital, but I think I was standing at the junction at Poplar Crescent, Poplar Crescent and Hayfield Road. So yeah, in that general area.
So away from the roundabout
Yeah.
near Gallagher's in the opposite direction along Hayfield Road.
That's correct, yes.
Closer to where the hospital is.
Yes.
Thank you. I forgot to ask you to identify yourself in the previous Snapchat.
Yep.
Can we go back to 727.18, please? I think the Snapchat starts at 31 seconds. Right, if we pause it there. You mentioned earlier that you were looking over in the direction of DC Connell.
Yeah.
So do you want to touch
Yep.
the screen and point yourself out? Right.
So literally where the number 1 is, it's
Yeah,
obviously
that's
covering
you.
my body, but that's me, yeah.
Let's remove it so everyone can see that. So that's you looking towards DC Connell.
Yeah.
Thank you. And would you look please for me at a label which is in a plastic, the knife. Oh, we don't have it. I won't need you to identify it at the moment. Can I now ask you to look at some other photographs they're stills that have been taken. Perk 03374. Now this is a still that's been marked up with people identified, and you'll see in the bright blue jacket near the grass area someone's written DC Connell.
Yeah.
And I wonder, can you confirm that where we see the various names, if they're correct? So let's start with yourself, PC McDonough.
Yeah, that's correct.
That's you looking towards DC Connell.
Yeah.
And then PC Walker to the right, on the road walking towards the scene.
Yeah, that's correct.
And then PC Gibson kneeling down or crouched down to your right.
That's correct.
And then to your left, it says PC Tomlinson.
Yes.
So looking towards the hedge, if you like.
Yeah.
And then opposite PC Tomlinson, PC Good. Kaylee Good.
Yes, that's correct.
To the left of PC Tomlinson is PC Payton, crouched down with his right arm stretching over.
Yes.
Opposite him, PC Smith.
Yeah, that's correct.
To PC Smith's right, DS Davidson.
Yeah.
And then to the far left, PS Police Sergeant Maxwell.
Yeah, that's correct.
And on the right-hand side, blurred in the image, it says D.I. Robson.
Yeah.
Are you able to recognise
Well,
D.I. Robson?
to be fair, I don't get any point. I've mentioned him in my statement. I actually can't remember him being there, but if other people have identified him as being there, that's fine, but I can't actually remember him being there.
So you don't know that's D.I. Robson?
No.
All right. Can we look at the next photo on this? Just down, please. And you see there at the bottom with his back to the camera, it says PC Walker.
Yeah.
And do we see a sort of band underneath his top or his black body armour?
Yeah.
And above his trousers, his dark trousers, a sort of band, a pale coloured band.
Yeah.
Was that the pale band that we saw earlier?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Right, I'd like to turn back to your inquiry statement, please. Paragraph 43. You're asked about what you were thinking and feeling when they were trying to resuscitate Mr. Bio.
Yeah.
And you say, I was aware that an ambulance had been called for. As a result of this, I felt anxious and concerned for Mr. Bio. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, it's never a nice thing knowing that an ambulance has been called for someone. You always kind of fear the worst for someone who's needing an ambulance call for them. I was also aware that he was unconscious at one point as well, so automatically you're thinking, has his condition worsened? So that's kind of the thoughts that are going through my head at that point.
You've talked about him being unconscious and the ambulance being called. Where were you at that point?
I was at that junction that I was telling you about, Poplar Crescent, doing the traffic duties, just preventing foot traffic and vehicles coming into the general area of where the incident took place.
So you were doing your traffic duties
Yeah.
at the other end of Hayfield Road?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, how long were you at the scene?
Doing traffic duties. I think I was maybe there for about an hour and a half. Because I seem to think that we were waiting on other officers from out with the area to come in and take over, so that in itself takes a wee bit of time. The reason I say that is I seem to remember it's round about 9 o'clock-ish I get back to the office.
So you were ultimately relieved by another officer from out with Team 4?
Yeah, I didn't know what their name was or anything.
Before you left the scene completely, did any senior officers speak to you?
I remember Inspector K being there at some point.
Could we have a look at paragraph 53?
Yeah.
Please. So you were asked by the inquiry team if you spoke to any senior officers before leaving the scene. And you said, prior to leaving the scene, I don't recall being instructed not to discuss the incident with other officers.
Yeah.
But you remember speaking to Stephen Kay at some point?
Yeah, I don't remember what the conversation was. I think I remember speaking or using the point-to-point system on the radio to get in contact with PC Gibson to see if he had I can't remember if it was the car or the car keys for the vehicle, so I had a feeling that my jacket was in the car because it was cold and it was wet that day. So I think possibly Inspector Kay's maybe asked me if I've got something warmer to wear, and then I've kind of explored that with PC Gibson, but I can't say for certain what any conversation was that took place.
Did anyone instruct you not to discuss the incident with other officers?
Not that I recall, no.
Okay. And how did you get back to Kirkcaldy Police Office?
So once myself and PC Good were relieved of doing our points duties, I think I seem to remember it was a female officer who took over from me, and she instructed me that she was just the messenger at that point. She was just telling me that I have to take PC Good back to the station. I think it was just from one of the vehicles that were left at the scene.
Right. And you went to the canteen?
Yeah.
Can we look at paragraph 57, please? You went straight to the canteen and other officers were there. You've explained that to us. And the only person that wasn't there was PC Short.
Yeah.
She was still at the hospital.
Yeah, that's correct.
How long did you remain in the canteen that day?
I was one of the last to leave.
When did you leave?
I've got this recollection in my head that I remember getting in the house, like my own house, about 10 o'clock at night. So if I'm right in saying that, I probably would have left Kirkcaldy Police Station round about 9:15, 9:30, I think, at night.
So when I say how long were you in the canteen, were you there the whole time?
Yeah, I was, yeah.
Right. Had you received instructions to remain within the canteen?
Yes.
Who from?
I can't remember. So, only having 6 months service, there's still a lot of senior officers that you don't see regularly, so putting names to faces and stuff can be quite difficult, and you see that many people coming through the door. I honestly can't remember. I'm also aware at some point Chief Inspector Trickett was there at one point. I don't know if it was him that's maybe said that. I'm not
Could
sure.
we look at paragraph 60? You were asked about instructions. You say you were instructed to remain in the canteen. I think I may have been advised that Federation representatives were being contacted on our behalf.
Yeah.
I can't remember who said this. I discussed the advice I received from the Federation below. So, do you remember if Stephen Kay came into the canteen?
I don't remember if he came in, no.
Do you remember a Pat Campbell?
I don't even know who that is.
All right. Do you remember a Gary McEwen being there that day?
I obviously know who he is, but I just can't seem to picture him being there.
Do you want to have a look at page 8 of your perk statement?
Yeah, please.
Paragraph 6. And it starts, at no time on Sunday the 3rd of May did anyone ask me to provide an operational statement. A lot of other officers entered the canteen whilst we were there and asked us how we were all feeling. One of the officers I know was Gary McEwen, the Chief Superintendent, but to be honest, I can't recall everything he said or any of the other officers said. I think we were all in shock. Do you remember saying that?
Yeah, yeah.
So you did know a Gary McEwen, a Chief Superintendent?
Yeah, if I've said that he was there at the time, then I'll happy to accept that's what I've said and that's what's happened.
So in this regard, your PERC statement will be correct?
Yeah.
And then can I ask you where you put your equipment?
Yeah, so it was kind of the thing that you would do when you're having your meal break in the canteen, that you would just take your vest off, take your belt off, and I would generally wrap my belt around my vest to keep it all together and just prop it up against a wall. There was no pegs as such, there was no storeroom, it was just a case of leaving it in a safe place and where you knew it was.
Yeah.
You could keep an eye on it when you're sitting having your meal.
And did other officers do the same?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah. We've heard that other officers had things lying around
Yeah.
and leaning against walls and things.
Yeah.
And we've heard that some items were kept on a table.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember that?
Yeah, I vaguely remember that. I think it was items that were left at the scene. Items being equipment that was used, battens, leg restraints. I don't know if there was anything else. Probably, I'm not sure if maybe CS was involved in that, but it was just equipment that I remember being left on the table.
And had been recovered at
Yeah.
the scene. Look at paragraph 70 of your inquiry statement,
Yeah.
sorry. I think you've given some information about this to the chair. And you say that your stab-proof vest was recovered, your fleece, your black police t-shirt and utility belt, and your various pieces of equipment you've detailed.
Yeah.
And they were recovered from you. You say on your return to Cape, the question is what equipment was recovered from you on return to KPO, but from what you said already, you had that equipment with you for a while in the canteen.
Yeah.
When was it recovered from you?
So when we were told to go and hand over our equipment before we could leave the building, vaguely remember being told, I can't remember by who, to identify what is yours on the table essentially and take it up to the room so that it can be forensically seized, or well, not forensically seized but seized.
What's the difference?
Forensically seized, that would be for the for like DNA purposes. You do it across contamination. So I'm aware it was just seized as opposed to forensically seized.
So how was your equipment seized from you?
I remember it was two females, and I think they were wearing gloves, masks, and I think a white suit, which would probably suggest a forensic seizure.
All right.
But I can't remember if it was to be forensically seized or not, or if that was just standard for them to do that at that time.
Okay. We may hear more about that in due
Yeah.
course. Can I ask you about paragraph 72? And you were asked about the status of yourself. Now, when I say status, I mean as a witness or as a suspect.
Yeah.
And you say you didn't know at the time what your status was, but you do say, I think at 73, you subsequently received advice from your solicitor, Professor Peter Watson. Do you see that?
Yeah, I do, yeah.
So on the 3rd of May, what information were you given about your status at the time?
I don't remember being told that day you are a witness or you are a suspect. I just remember Amanda Given kind of explaining to us, or I don't know if it was to us or to me because I was a probationer and had no experience at all of anything like this, that we would that we can receive or they can get in contact with our Federation lawyer on our behalf, who can give the relevant advice. That's kind of as brief as I remember.
And that was Amanda Given,
Yeah.
who we've heard is an SPF representative.
That's correct, yeah.
And the Federation lawyer, do you remember who that was?
It was Professor Peter Watson.
So the name you've given there.
Yeah.
And can we look at paragraph 75, please? So you're asked about advice given. Did you receive advice or instruction on your return from any senior officers or anyone from the SPF? And you say, I do not remember receiving advice or instruction from a senior officer at that time. I don't remember being given advice by Amanda Given, other than being told to speak to a lawyer.
Yeah.
Do you remember seeing, I'm going to read out a list of names, and I'm going to ask you if you remember seeing them or getting any advice from them. Conrad Trickett.
I remember that he was in the canteen at one point, giving advice. I honestly could not tell you if he gave any advice at all.
Stephen Kay.
I don't actually remember him being there.
I asked you earlier about Pat Campbell. You said you didn't know him.
No, I don't have a clue who he is. No.
Colin Robson.
I don't remember him being there either.
Okay. Can we look at paragraph 77, please? And I'd like to ask you about paperwork.
Yep.
You were asked about your obligations in relation to completing paperwork, including your notebooks, use of force form, a use of spray form, insofar as it related to the events at Hayfield Road.
Yeah.
So you see, at the time you were using your notebook for recording statements, details of the public, if you'd cautioned or charged someone. And you understood it was your responsibility to decide if you wished to put entries within your notebook or not.
Yeah.
And you say you weren't in a fit state to make an entry about the incident, other than your interactions with the 3 members of the public you referred to earlier,
Yeah.
because of all that had gone on. So you say you weren't in a fit state. How were you that day?
I'd probably describe it as just subdued, quite depressed at some degree, not quite just staring into space. I remember just sitting on the sofa, just staring at space. Kind of emotions are kind of all over the place. Bear in mind, I've only got 6 months service at that point. There's a lot going through my head. Is this right for me? Is this normal? Does this happen more regularly? So quite upset as well. Upset. So it's a lot to take in. Sitting in the canteen as well. Not really knowing what's going on and getting that sense that nobody really knew what was going on, and that's not like a sort of criticism that nobody knew what was going on, because I understand that it doesn't happen that often, but certainly for somebody, I think PC Good will be the same. With someone with such little experience, you're kind of looking for a wee bit firmer answers about what's happening.
What sort of information would you have liked that day?
I think probably where we stand. Like how is this incident being treated? Is it a death in custody where you're a witness? Is it a death in custody that you're a suspect? I think it's kind of the unknown, that you don't really know what's happening, that kind of has an emotional effect on you as well, because you're thinking all sorts at that point. Am I going to get locked up? Am I going to are you going to lose your job? You just didn't know what to think and what to do. So yeah, mixed emotions, just all over the shop, really.
Can I ask you about an operational statement? Do you remember any conversations, either that day or subsequently, about you providing an operational statement?
No. No, I can't say I do, no.
Can we look at paragraph 80, please? There may be a reference here to, I'd like to ask you about, some days later I was asked by MIT for an operational statement, but I had received legal advice not to provide one at that stage. Was the major incident team, two officers spoke to you, it may have been on about the 7th of May 2015?
Yeah, that's probably about right, yeah.
Were you informed that day about your status as a witness?
I honestly can't remember. There's a chance that I maybe would have been, but I can't say for certain if I had.
And you were asked to provide an operational statement by the MIT or the MIT, and you declined because of the advice that you'd received.
Yeah, that's correct.
Who was that advice from?
It's from Professor mixed up. Professor Peter Watson, and I think I remember that he was looking for confirmation in writing, so that there is every chance that we got told that we were witnesses, but I want to say that we were maybe given, that he was looking for it in writing, to be clarified.
So he was wanting that confirmed in writing
Yeah.
before he would advise you to give a statement?
Yeah.
Can I move on and ask you some questions about race, please?
Yeah.
If you've watched other evidence, you'll know that I've asked some other officers these questions
Yeah,
as
of
well.
course.
You're obviously telling us today that you'd been 6 months in the job.
Yeah.
So you'd been at Tullyallen 6 months prior doing your training,
Yeah.
your initial training. Do you remember if you'd had training on equality and diversity?
Yeah, so that's always, or it's on the first week or two. I can't remember if it's over 1 week or 2 weeks, but yeah, it's your first 1 or 2 weeks off being at the college that you get taught that.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember what the course covered?
Covered a wide variety of things. Ethnicity, sort of disabilities, sex, religions, discrimination, quite a few things. I honestly can't remember everything that was taught, but it did cover sort of wide variety of things.
And how did the things you learned on that training, how did you implement that in your day-to-day practice?
Well, before I went to the college, I was always brought up to treat everyone the same anyway. So I feel like I was implementing that into the college anyway. Leaving the college, I think the thing that you take away from the college is never be too scared to ask questions if you're unsure about certain things, especially when it comes to like religion or I don't know, gender equality, that sort of thing. Just ask people if you're unsure, because at the end of the day, for a police officer, you need to have a degree of knowledge to be able to educate other people, whether it be colleagues or members of the public. So that's, yeah.
When you say educate other people, whether that be colleagues, what do you mean?
Well, you never know when you could ever encounter any situation where something could be said inappropriately, whether it be slip of the tongue, an error, or as in a serious way. So you need to be prepared for that.
What would you do if you did encounter, for example, racism or a racist comment?
I would challenge it. Again, you would probably have an idea of how, in what context it was used in. So you could just be as simple as educating them, make them aware that you can't use that term or at all. Or if it was something quite sinister or serious, you've got line managers, people further up the tree who can take things further, who can take disciplinary action. So you've got a couple of options.
You've told us you were a probationer.
Yeah.
And we've heard evidence about the different ranks, people being more senior. How would you have felt about challenging someone more senior than you?
Appreciate that. some people would probably find that quite a daunting thing to do. However, if it's something that he's addressed, then I don't think I would have an issue doing that.
In the 6 months you spent at Kirkcaldy Police Office, had you come across any examples of that?
I've obviously thought about this before coming here, and I haven't. I can't say that I've heard or be able to give any examples of it.
Okay. Were you taught about unconscious bias on the training course at Tullyallen?
Again, I've thought about that. I don't know if at any point, I'll probably like to say no, but I don't know if at the point if unconscious bias has had another meaning or another term to describe it, but I don't remember the words unconscious bias being within the learning outcomes or the modules that were taught. I can't remember ever seeing those words. I could be wrong, but I don't remember.
All right. Do you are you aware, or through your training aware, of any assumptions that you make about people because of the colour of their skin?
No.
In 2015, in around the May, when you were doing your probation, how many officers at Kirkcaldy were black?
At Kirkcaldy, I don't think in that time, I don't think there was any.
Were you aware, either from your training in Tullyallen or just your general awareness, about public concern about the use of force by police officers, particularly against black men?
No, the only thing that I would be aware of is in the media, mainly in America. So just from watching the news, things like that. That's, in terms of within Scotland, I wasn't aware.
What about in England?
I can't think of anything specific. Ever seen anything in relation to England? No.
Do you remember when you were at Tullyallen getting any training about inquests or situations which had occurred in England as a learning exercise?
No. Again, if it's something that has been implemented, I can't remember, but there's nothing that's jumping out at me or jogging my memory to say that I had.
Do you remember being aware at that time about any high-profile deaths which had occurred as a result of restraint by police officers?
Again, no. Nah.
Were you aware of any public concern or issues being debated about the use of restraint by police officers?
No.
Okay. Can I ask you, at that time in May 2015, what your awareness of the black community in Kirkcaldy was?
What do you mean by the black community? Is that like a figure or?
No, and not one individual, just black people in Kirkcaldy.
Yeah, certainly you're aware from just doing your duties, where it be, I don't know, walking down the high street, for example, driving down the high street, going to various shops. There's retail parks in Kirkcaldy, there's hospitals in Kirkcaldy. You do see black people in Kirkcaldy. If I can't obviously say if they live in Kirkcaldy, but certainly, yes, there is black people in Kirkcaldy, yeah.
And what contact had you had with those people?
I don't recall ever arresting or dealing with anyone who was black as a suspect. And there's nothing jumping out at me that I've dealt with any victims or witnesses who were black either. There is a chance that I have, but there's nothing I can think of that. Nothing specific, no.
Had you done any community relation work?
So I've never really done any community roles whilst being at Kirkcaldy. There is also a community team that's based at every station, and if they have done any community relations, it would generally be them that would be involved in them, but it would be talks at schools or going to community halls to discuss matters in the community. They'll probably be best placed to be able to answer that.
That's not something you were involved in?
No, it wasn't, no.
Were any of the colleagues you had on the team involved in that, as far as you're aware?
Not that I'm aware, no.
Okay. Were you aware of any negative views being held by colleagues about black people?
No. No.
Were you aware of stereotypes which existed about black people generally, or black men specifically, in the context of criminal justice?
Yes, I'm aware of stereotypes.
What sort of stereotypes are you aware of?
In relation to black people?
Black men.
Black
or
men.
Black people.
So a stereotype that I'm aware of would be that all black males are superior athletes, or good at running, or superior at running. Another one, it was mentioned the other day, and I was always going to say it, all young black males are involved in gangs, another stereotype. So I am aware of them, and I think it's important to be aware of them, because again, it's the whole thing of being able to educate people, being able to recognise various stereotypes, and I'm aware of stereotypes in all walks of life. It's not just black people, so I think it's really important that you need to be aware of them.
You say it's important to be aware.
Yeah.
And you mention education. Why do you think it's important to be aware of these?
Just to be able to point out to people that sort of that stereotypes aren't facts. That they're offensive as well, and you need to be able to tell people, make them aware that they're offensive for whatever reason, to try and make a difference, really, and get people to try and change their way of thinking.
And how do you personally guard against judging people because of stereotypes?
So guarding against unconscious bias. So
Yes.
yeah, constantly asking yourself questions. Put yourself in that person's shoes. How would they feel if they knew I was thinking that, or why am I thinking that? Again, what's the reasons for thinking that? Educating yourself, essentially.
Is this something that you were taught at Tullyallen during your training?
I'm not entirely sure, because I know I've already said that I can't remember the term unconscious bias ever being, that term being used at the college. But there's every chance that it has been taught. I can't remember. I'd like to think that I've implemented that way of thinking anyway. Also, at the end of the day, you want to treat everyone the same way and with respect, so I think I've probably done that anyway.
Have you had any additional training as part of your job at Police Scotland in relation to equality and diversity since May 2015?
I would like to think I would have remembered if I had. I can't remember.
All right. Have you educated yourself about any of these matters since 2015?
And what do you mean, sorry, and like?
Well, you've talked about you have to educate yourself. Have you maybe read into the subject, or looked at programmes discussing the subject, or read things on the internet?
So so what I mean is, I'm not an expert at knowing everything. In the police, you do come across people with all backgrounds, and I think it's important to know where to look for the information, whether it be the internet, to be able to how to ask appropriate questions. For example, religion, Hinduism, Christianity. You need to be able to know where to find information. And
do you know where to look to find the information?
I would generally probably just use the internet, or ask senior officers if they had any other options.
Is it possible that you made any assumptions on the 3rd of May 2015 that influenced how you acted in relation to Mr. Bio?
No, I can safely say I never.
Could you give me one moment, please?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I have no further questions.
Apart from Ms McCall, are there any Rule 9 applications? Ms Mitchell, just Ms Mitchell. Constable, I wonder if you would withdraw to the witness room while I hear a submission.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, Ms Mitchell, if you come to the table, please. Yes.
Yes, the first issue I'd like to explore with the witness is whether or not he remembers Chief Inspector Nicola Shepherd coming into the canteen. Now, this witness did arrive a little later than others, and it may be that he didn't, but if he does remember Chief Inspector Nicola Shepherd coming in, whether or not he remembered her speaking to them, and if so, what did she say? The inquiry might remember that they've already heard evidence that Chief Inspector Nicola Shepherd had a conversation where she said people should give statements, I'm paraphrasing, but also saying that the family has a right to know what happened. So it's to find out whether or not this witness recalls that.
I recall the evidence that it was accepted that she did say that.
Yes, I think it...
So the inquiry has that evidence.
Oh, well,
I don't think it's necessary to hear it from another witness.
Well, if...
Particularly one who was much later in arriving.
He, as I say, he may or may not have been in, and I would like to ask that question, but I hear what the inquiry says. The next question that I would like to ask, this witness has already indicated that he has a knowledge or he has an awareness of stereotyping, and of course the inquiry has already heard of a number of descriptions which have been made available, and the inquiry has already heard them. In fact, in relation to a number of other witnesses, senior counsel to the inquiry went through this list, including could be part of a terrorist plot, muscular build, how crazy he looked. I have never seen a more frightening, crazy man in my life, and I could see he was completely out of control. And I was wishing to put to the witness whether or not he recognised these as potential stereotypes of a black man. Those are my questions. Those are my questions.
I think having already had a substantial amount of evidence in relation to stereotyping and taking into account what this witness has already said about stereotyping, I think I have sufficient material and it wouldn't be necessary to explore this further with this witness. Thank you, Ms Mitchell. If you would like to return to your seat, please. Ms McCall, do you have any matters?
Two short matters.
Do you want to come to the table and tell me about them, please?
The first matter, sir, is that in the transcript at page 12, Senior Counsel to the Inquiry asked Constable McDonough about whether he'd attended any knife incident where restraint was used. And Constable McDonough asked what was meant by restraint, and there was a discussion about that, and then he provided a non-knife example of using the leg straps. I'm aware he does have an example of a knife incident involving restraint, if that would be of assistance to the inquiry. It bears some similarities of multiple officers, a perpetrator actively resisting and requiring to be restrained and taken to the ground. So that was the first matter. And the second matter is one of clarification. At page 89 of the transcript, Constable McDonough was asked where he was when Mr. Bayo became unconscious and the ambulance was called. Now, he'd already indicated that at that time he was holding Mr. Bayo in position and then got up and went and looked for the knife. But at page 89, he said he was at Poplar Crescent on Traffic Point. And I simply wanted to clarify with him whether that was, which of those is correct, and the fact that he let the ambulance through the cordon when he was at Poplar Crescent, which suggests that he's got the sequence slightly wrong in his latter answer. So those are the two issues.
Now it's 1:10. How long do you think that would take?
5 minutes or so?
Very well, we'll try and do that now then, if you could rearrange the seats. If we can have the witness back, please. Constable McDonough, your own counsel, Ms McCall, has some questions.
Okay.
Ms McCall.
Constable McDonough, just two things I want to ask you about. The first is that you were asked by Miss Graham about whether you've been involved in any knife incidents that required restraint. And I wanted to ask you about an example of such an incident, if you can recollect one, because the example you gave was not a knife incident earlier.
Yeah. So it's quite difficult to think of ones, but I am aware that it was about a year ago I was involved in a knife incident. I was involved in the restraint, probably played a lesser part in the restraint because I was a CID officer at the time, so I didn't have all my equipment on me at the time. The call to police was that a male had his arm almost cut off, essentially, and firearms officers were, or a taser trained officer was dispatched. However, there was a suggestion that the person responsible had left the scene. When the officers arrived, including myself, they found the injured male and they identified where it had taken place, and that was at the male's back garden. Locus protection was put in place. Locus protection is basically officers standing by a house for to make sure that nothing was being interfered with within the cordon tape. I was in a nearby neighbour's house getting a witness statement from them. There was 2 officers on the locus protection, and then a call came over the radio saying that they've been approached by a male who appeared intoxicated, stating that he was responsible for causing injury to the male. They've requested other units to attend. I've also made my way out, and they've got a male in handcuffs to the rear. he appeared to be under the influence of something. Of that, I do not know. But whilst talking to him, he said the thing you're looking for is in my pocket. So I kind of took that to mean that it was a knife. So another officer who had already had gloves, he searched the mail. Once the knife was found, it was at that point he decided to, I would just use the term kick off. Kicking out, he was spitting at officers, the usual verbal stuff like that, and he was trying to bite officers as well. So at that point he was placed into the prone position, and leg restraints were applied before being taken into custody. I was involved in the restraint on the ground to be able to get the leg restraints on him before he was conveyed into custody.
Had you seen him being handcuffed, or did that happen before you arrived?
That happened before I was arrived. I think as soon as, the impression I'm getting, as soon as he's approached officers, said, I'm responsible, he gave quite specific information about the attack, which led the officers to believe that there was absolutely no doubt about it, it was him. So as soon as he approached them, handcuffed straight away. That's what I'm led to believe anyway.
And once the knife was recovered and he started, as you put it, kicking off, how many officers did it take to get him to the ground and restrain him on the ground?
At least 4. At least 4.
Let me come to a different issue, just to clarify something. You described when you were being taken through your perk statement and correcting the order of events of one part,
Yeah.
that at the point where Mr. Bio had been rolled onto his left side and you were monitoring his legs and he became motionless, that it was at that point that you got up and went and looked over on the grassy area.
Mm-hmm.
You were asked at a later stage about where you were when Mr. Bio became unconscious and the ambulance was called. And at that later stage, you said you were on traffic point at Poplar Crescent. Can I just ask you which of those versions is correct?
Sorry, that's probably been a mistake. I maybe misheard it. I believe that I was still with Mr. Bio at the time when that request for the ambulance was made.
All right. When you were at Poplar Crescent doing the traffic point, did you put the cordon tape across or someone else?
I think I assisted DS Davison with that. I think she had the cordon tape and we helped each other because it was a windy day, so it needed 2 of us.
And at the point when you were putting the cordon tape across, did you have to let a vehicle in?
Yeah, it was ambulance.
So as you were cordoning off Poplar Crescent, the ambulance was actually arriving, is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Constable McDonough, thank you very much for coming to give evidence to the inquiry. We're about to rise for lunch and you'll be free to go then.
Thank you, sir.
So we'll rise for lunch and sit at 2:15.